At 2 in the morning on November 18, 2025, an underground train in Pittsburgh made its last run and stopped forever. For 33 years, that tram had shuttled passengers between two separate buildings, a check-in terminal on one side and the gates on the other. It was built that way for one reason. Pittsburgh wasn't supposed to be a place people flew to. It was a place people changed planes. A few hours later, a United red-eye from San Francisco touched down and became the first arrival at Pittsburgh's brand new $1.7 billion terminal. Now here's what makes this strange. In 1997, this airport handled more than 20 million passengers. US Airways ran 542 flights a day out of here and employed almost 12,000 people. You could fly non-stop from Pittsburgh to more than 110 cities. Then, the airline left, and Pittsburgh lost roughly 80% of its traffic. 22 gates were closed off and turned into a parking lot. Whole concourses were walled up to save on electricity bill. So why would a city that lost its airline just spend $1.7 billion on a new airport? Because Pittsburgh finally figured out something most dehubbed cities never do. And the answer starts with the sentence the new CEO said to her own board on the day she took the job.
To understand the comeback, you have to understand how strange the original airport was. In October 1992, Pittsburgh opened what the New York Times called the Airport of the Future. It cost about $1 billion, and it was built almost entirely to US Airways specifications. It introduced things the whole industry copied. The X-shaped airside terminal, 4 concourses radiating from a central core, was the first successful version of that design anywhere, and airports around the world still use it. And it had the Air Mall, the first proper shopping mall built past security in an American airport with more than 100 stores that promised the same prices you'd pay in town. People from the western suburbs would drive out to the airport just to shop. It was designed to handle up to 35 million passengers a year. But look closer at the design and you can see the assumption baked into it. 2 separate buildings, a tram in between. That layout only makes sense when most of your passengers never leave the secure area, because they're connecting. And they were. At its peak, about 80% of everyone moving through Pittsburgh was changing planes. Only 1 in 5 was actually going to Pittsburgh. That's not really an airport for a city. That's a sorting facility that happens to sit near one. August 2001 was the busiest month in its history. 2 million passengers, around 630 flights a day. 7 daily flights to Latrobe, a town 40 miles away. It was, briefly, one of the most connected places in America. And then, over about 3 years, it wasn't. US Airways was in trouble long before Pittsburgh felt it. It had the highest costs of any major US airline. It filed for bankruptcy in 2002 and again in September 2004. And by its own accounting, it was losing around $40 million a year on the Pittsburgh hub, while paying roughly 80% of the airport's $673 million of debt. That's the trap. Pittsburgh had built a palace on the assumption US Airways would keep filling it. US Airways couldn't afford the rent. The two sides fought over fees. They couldn't reach a deal. And on November 7, 2004, US Airways closed the Pittsburgh hub. Watch the speed of it. In July 2004, US Airways ran 373 flights a day at Pittsburgh. By September, 327. By early November, 229. Daily seats went from 41,000 in 2000 to about 10,000 by 2007. The region lost more than 10,000 airline jobs. US Airways' Pittsburgh workforce fell from about 12,700 to 3,000. The county executive called it a second devastating blow after the collapse of steel in the 80s. And that comparison mattered because Pittsburgh had already been through one economy dying. Then came the physical evidence. Concourse E, 22 gates, was closed and converted into a parking lot. 12 of the 25 gates in Concourse B were boarded up. Half of Concourses A and B were walled off entirely, which saved about $1 million a year in utilities. An airport built for 35 million people was serving fewer than 4 million boardings a year by the 2010s, roughly a fifth of what it was designed for. And the airmail, the famous shopping destination, emptied out because the shoppers were connecting passengers who no longer existed. Pittsburgh became the textbook example of what happens when an airline leaves. Cincinnati, St. Louis, Memphis, they all lived versions of the same story. But then Pittsburgh did something the others mostly didn't.
In January 2015, the airport hired a new chief executive named Christina Cassotis. She inherited an airport connected to just 37 cities nonstop, down from over 110, and the entire region was still waiting, hoping for someone to come replace US Airways. Cassotis told them the truth instead. Her line, repeated ever since, "The hub is not coming back." She went further, saying Pittsburgh had gotten used to a level of air service that, honestly, the region couldn't support on its own. That sounds like surrender. It was the opposite, because once you stop chasing a hub, you can start building the thing you can actually sustain, an airport where the passengers are people who actually live in and visit your city. Origin and destination traffic, real local demand. And that traffic doesn't depend on one airline's strategy, it depends on your economy. So Pittsburgh went hunting for routes, one at a time, with incentives and pitches to airlines that had never seriously looked at the city. The results took a decade. Non-stop destinations went from 36 at the bottom to 62. Airlines went from 7 to 15. And then came the part nobody expected: Europe. Pittsburgh had lost London service back in 1999. British Airways came back in April 2019 with a Boeing 787, and it now flies year-round. Icelandair launched Reykjavik in 2024, and in May 2026, Aer Lingus started flying Dublin, Pittsburgh's first ever non-stop to Ireland. 3 European destinations, the most Pittsburgh has had since 2018. But the most important number is this one. No airline at Pittsburgh today has more than about 27% of the market. Southwest is the largest. American, Delta, and United follow. Compare that to the hub era, when one airline controlled roughly 90% of the airport. Pittsburgh went from a company town to a competitive market, and that's precisely why it survived Spirit Airlines shutting down in May 2026 without much drama, because losing one carrier isn't fatal anymore. So what's actually generating this demand? Pittsburgh is not a steel town anymore. Carnegie Mellon University has one of the strongest computer science and robotics programs on Earth, and the companies around it have reshaped the region. The self-driving car industry effectively started here. Uber built its autonomous vehicle operation in Pittsburgh in 2015, hiring away much of Carnegie Mellon's robotics staff. That business eventually became part of Aurora Innovation, which is headquartered in Pittsburgh's Strip District and now runs driverless freight trucks in Texas. Duolingo, the language app on hundreds of millions of phones, is a Carnegie Mellon spin-off and became Pittsburgh's first billion-dollar startup. Google has been in the city since 2009. There's a stretch of East Liberty locals call AI Avenue. And in 2025, venture capital investment in the region hit a record of about $2 billion, more than double the year before. That's what fills a British Airways 787 out of Pittsburgh, not tourists, engineers, researchers, executives, and academics. But here's the problem, and the video would be dishonest without it. Pittsburgh's metro area is still shrinking. As of mid-2025, it had about 2.4 million people, down slightly from the year before and down roughly 1.5% since 2020. Pittsburgh has had more deaths than births since the 1990s. It was the first large American metro where that happened. So how is an airport growing in a region that's losing people? 2 reasons. First, the city of Pittsburgh is actually growing, even as the metro shrinks. Young people are moving into the urban core. Second, the kind of people arriving are exactly the kind who fly a lot and pay more when they do. It's a quality over quantity comeback, which works, but it has a hard ceiling. So let's put a number on the comeback. In 2024, Pittsburgh handled about 9.9 million passengers, its best year since 2006 and finally above pre-pandemic levels. In 2025, it did 9.8 million, essentially flat. That's roughly half of what it handled at its peak. By that measure, Pittsburgh has not recovered. It's nowhere near 20 million, and it never will be. But that's the wrong measure, and here's why. In 2024, Pittsburgh set an all-time record for local passengers. Over 9.7 million people actually starting or ending their trips in Pittsburgh. That's the highest in the airport's recorded history, higher than the hub years. Think about what that means. At its supposed peak, 4 out of 5 people at this airport were just passing through. Today, almost everyone there chose Pittsburgh. The old airport was busier. The new one is more genuinely Pittsburgh's. And that's what the new terminal is really about. The old building had 8 miles of baggage belts and a tram because it was built to sort connecting passengers. The new one has 3 miles of belts, 1 security checkpoint, and a direct walk to the gates because it was built for people who live here. It's expected to save around $23 million a year just in operating costs, and it was funded without local tax dollars through airport revenue bonds paid by the people using the airport. It also wasn't cheap or clean. The cost went from an estimated $1.1 billion in 2017 to about $1.7 billion, a 54% increase, and the airport never published a detailed breakdown of the overrun. Critics, including the architect of the original 1992 terminal, questioned whether it was needed at all. So what should you actually watch from here? Watch whether Southwest keeps growing at Pittsburgh or starts trimming, because at 27%, it's still the biggest single dependency. Watch whether all 3 European routes survive their second and third summers. Mid-city transatlantic flying has a long history of not lasting. And watch the population, because an airport can outperform its region for a while, but not forever. Pittsburgh built an airport for an airline that abandoned it, spent 20 years half empty inside a building meant for 35 million people, and then did the one thing almost nobody does after a hub collapse. It stopped waiting for the hub to come back. And it turns out, the comeback was never about getting the old airport back. It was about finally becoming the right size for the city it was standing in.